models of people who are like you, this is a great place to do that. But I was just have been in conversations with a lot of students of color, and they don't have those role models of people who look like them. So I wanted us to get some people who know about these things to talk to us a little bit about, so how does that work? How do they find their way to be appropriate members of their own subculture as well as dominant culture when we don't really offer them very many models? We're doing the best we can, but we aren't people of color, so how do we make that work? So I've asked these people to present for us, and I don't know if they have an order, but I think you know them, but I always think everybody knows everybody, and it turns out I'm the only one who knows everybody. So Trish McClung is the department chair for the Early Childhood, Elementary, and Special Education Department, and she's been at Lee for many years, and she works in the area of child development or human development. And Lena Barber is a member of the counseling staff in the Lee Counseling Center. She's also been here in many different positions for a long time. And Richard Jones is a member of our anthropology faculty, so they'll be looking at this from their discipline perspectives. So, do we have a first?
Richard, I think, is going first, don't you?
Right?
Okay, gentlemen first.
Okay, since I have the notes, okay, so the reason I wrote down the notes is because I didn't want to forget what I wanted to say, because I'm getting older and that happens. Anthropologists come at this from a very macro perspective initially. I mean, we look at the big picture, right? And let me just list off a few things that are part of the big picture for these ethnic minority students or cultural minority students that are on our campus. Some of them are immigrants themselves. Some of them are second generation immigrants. Their parents immigrated and they were born here. Some of them are third generation immigrants. Some of them are members of an ethnic group within the United States, have not migrated at all. Okay, so there are some ethnic minority that's here. And there are many ethnic groups in the United States, but within those ethnic groups themselves are not homogeneous, so it's complex. Some have bicultural parentage. Okay, there are other factors: the language that they speak and/or the accent that they have, the social class within the ethnic group from which they come, and the religion they have within all of those categories. What I'm trying to point out is this is a horribly complex kind of thing. There's no one size fits all. And from my perspective, all the stuff that's going on in our federal government in the history of the United States, is we've always tried to come up with things that it's one size fits all, and that never works because of all these differences that I just told you here: class, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, all these differences. Also the personal history of when they migrated, who migrated, all that kind of stuff. And those are the kind of kids we're getting in our classes. We're getting all of those, not just one kind. So let me tell you just three quick experiences I've had. One of them at Lee, the other two not, that kind of point out this diversity, and then I'll make a suggestion about what we might do about that. Stephen Wassef is a Coptic Christian that I knew up at Wayne State University when I taught up there. He has bicultural parentage. His father was an Egyptian, and his mother was a white, non-Hispanic American. I'm still trying to figure out what white, non-Hispanic means. And before 2001, before 9/11, all Arab Americans most of them identified as white. So it's the government just has a crazy, confusing thing about this whole thing. And on top of that, again, we're at the macro perspective. As an anthropologist, there's no such thing as race. There's no biological category of race. People believe in it, but it's a fantasy, it's a myth. It doesn't make what people do in the name of race, unreal. It's real. People discriminate, do those sort of things. But if we could just quit talking about race, that would go a long way. But our federal government does it. The federal government makes you check boxes for race, and that's wrong. But anyway, I digress. Stephen Wassef was this Egyptian father, American mother. His father, upper class Egyptian. Okay, his father's brother, his a very wealthy man in Egypt. But they were also had to leave Egypt for political reasons. Okay, so they came to the United States. So his father's Egyptian. He was born in the United States. He grew up speaking Kitchen Arabic. Okay, his father did not want him to learn Arabic. Said, "You're going to live in America." He said, "Don't learn Arabic." So he knew very little Arabic. He thought of himself as an Egyptian until he went to Egypt one day And they referred to him with the same disparaging term that the Egyptians here refer to new people who come over. They called him a boater. And he didn't fit in, even with his relatives. They thought he was alien. And so here's a guy who's a Christian, second generation in America, in my classroom, who has all this dissonance and inner turmoil over who am I, right? Am I Egyptian? Am I American? Am I Egyptian American? Whatever that means, Arab American, whatever. He also heard from the bishop. You know, the church was a big part of his identity, the Coptic Orthodox Church, but the bishop comes over from Egypt and, you know, tells all the young Coptic boys, don't marry those American girls, you know, only marry the Coptic. But there aren't that many Coptic Christian girls around to marry, unless you go back to Egypt, but you're not wanted in Egypt because you're not an Egyptian anymore. So that's the kind of baggage that he, as a college student at Wayne State, carried around with him. Twomey is a Japanese girl that I tutored. Her mother was, Keiko was a fellow graduate student with me in the linguistics program at Oakland University. And her husband worked for Mazda, which had just built a plant down in Flat Rock, Michigan. So they had migrated from Japan for her husband to work at Flat Rock. They asked me, because Keiko knew me, to come and tutor their daughter in American culture. A 9-year-old, a little bit less than college, but a 9-year-old girl, cute little girl, sweet as could be. And one day, everything went swell. I had all these lesson plans, kind of giving her a broad macro picture of American culture and stuff. One day she came home, she always greeted me at the door when she came in. I was usually having tea with her parents when she'd come in. She looked at me like she could kill me. And that's odd for Japanese folks, I mean. And then she just ran up the stairs, never said hi to me or anything, and her parents were furious. In the Japanese way, here's how a Japanese is furious. I could tell they were seething, and they were, because they went right up the stairs after her. And they brought her down and told her to apologize to me and to say hi to me. And then when I started the lesson with her, I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "You Americans are just so bad." I said, "Well, what happened?" And she said some boys were telling a joke at school, and this was the joke they told. The Spaceship Challenger had just exploded like 3 days before this. These 9-year-old boys, American boys, told this joke. They said, "Where did the astronauts vacation this year?" Answer, all over Florida. Funny to 9-year-old American boys. That's how Americans handle grief, right? With humor, especially if it's not grief close to the family, they handle it with humor. Tore her apart. I mean, her admiration of American culture just disintegrated under that. And so she was confused about what she was doing here. She different than Japan, really conflicted. Finally, there was Pradip and Ajaya, a couple of Nepalese guys that were around here a few years ago, came with a bunch of other Hindus to Lee University. Imagine that. These college immigrants who are Hindus coming to a Christian college in the United States. It was a confusing place for them. And I had them in quite a few of my classes, and so did Merle and some of the other, and so you probably had them in your classes too. They're great guys, but conflicted about a lot of things and puzzled about a lot of things. Well, the point is this. It's complicated, it's messy, there's no one size fits all, so how do you deal with it? Here's how I've always dealt with it. First, encourage and provide opportunities for dialogue and questions outside the classroom. Make friends with these people. As an anthropologist, I had to learn to get away from the macro perspective, the ivory tower perspective. And believe it or not, this is a difficult thing for some anthropologists to do. And actually just connect with these people individually, more psychologically, more socially, more like a sociologist.
You came over to our side.
Well, no, I wouldn't go that far. I'm still trying to understand and study your side. But that's the first thing, and really befriend them. That's the only way you're going to know individually what their problems are, and then you can help them. I mean, that's the best way. Not to try to apply any kind of program or anything. The other thing is, never make any individual a spokesperson for his or her ethnic group or culture. Because every ethnic group and culture is so diverse. It matters whether you're talking to a high-class Chilean, socially high-class Chilean, or a low-class Chilean. I mean, socioeconomically we're speaking now. They're different. They have different issues and problems, and also their immigration status and how they got here, how they arrived, all that stuff. And number 3, and be thoughtful about commentary on inflammatory current events. Be careful, be aware of who these people are, and just don't speak without understanding about some of these things, because it can really upset them and alienate them from a place of really trying to fit in. And so we should encourage that and not discourage it. And then treat them as individuals with their own unique developmental challenges and nurture them accordingly. You got to get close to them. That's the only solution I know. There's no program, no thing I know to do.
Good.
You're on.
I think that was very good. Do you want me to go next? Okay. I came in 1978, and I started working in the Office of Admissions, and one of the things I did was work with the international students and getting their I-20 forms in and all of their paperwork, showing sponsorship that they could pay for the whole 4 years and everything. And I think about the people that came in then that have still worked in our community. Esmeralda Lee at Life Care. I remember her working on her paperwork. I remember with Suzanne Holt, we tried to get her paperwork after she graduated to stay here. And Mark Charles, he was adopted by the Careys, and he sent in high school papers and told on me in chapel one day, 30 years later. I thought I was going to get fired from Lee for sure when they realized that I let him in on high school papers. It was a lot easier back then to let people through, I'll tell you. But I think about such an impact on our community that these people have brought, and my theoretical perspectives are individual, their individual stories as well. And one of the first things that I learned was I work with Dr. Khan on his big class. He teaches one time a year in the fall. And I started working with him when there were 300 students in the Dixon Center taking his class. We had a lot of international students, a lot of students that English was their second language. And I remember having to consider when I would write the tests, 50 multiple choice questions, that a lot of them didn't understand the idioms or the things that we take for granted that everybody would know. But I remembered as I was growing up, my German aunt used to look at me and say, "Du bist ein schlechter Hund." And when I found out what it meant, I said, "Why is she calling me a bad dog?" And it was a term of endearment. It was a slogan of endearment if you're mischief or if you're funny or something. And so I realized that a lot of our terminology, when you look at it piece by piece, as they have to, that it loses, they might lose the thought or the question. So I began taking all the students as a second language, and I told them Alabama couldn't come. We would go downstairs, and on test day, I would go down with them, and my teaching assistants would stay upstairs, and I would go over the question and ask them, "Do you understand the question?" And they would ask what the question meant, and it was really good. So I think we need to understand the student's perspective within their culture. I remember one time 3 Nigerians they weren't even trying to hide it. They were cheating like all get out, and I didn't want to embarrass them, but after class, I just told them when they handed me their paper, and I kept it aside to see if they all looked alike. I want you to meet me at a certain time at my office. So they all came, and they had no idea what I was going to say to them, and they were working together communally on their paper because that's how they had done it in their home. And so often we judge by what we do, and I think that's really, we need to take into consideration that everybody's not trying to cheat and everybody's not trying to get by, but we need to listen to them. And so we had a good laugh, and I said, I'm so glad that you did this in this class so I can explain to you how you need to do it in other classes and this class next time. And so talking to them, and I mean, when they graduated, they would still say, "It's a good thing we lasted this long. We cheated, because you get thrown out for that." Another one is engagement is the outcome of motivation, and we motivate them, but it's rewarded in diverse ways. So we find out their intrinsic motivating factors and realize that the pressure that attaches to. And I say all that, I should hand it out to you so you can see it and parse it. But in counseling, you would not believe a student could be here 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, but if they start to fail, how close it is to thinking that suicide is better than failure. Because failure is the absolute worst they could do. And when they come, I'm so glad when they do come, because I'm always concerned. Listen, every semester I think, phew, we made another semester. All our students are here, and but we have no idea those that slip through the cracks, and we really depend on faculty and staff to catch those students, and residential life is a huge part of that. They catch those that are suicidal or have those thoughts, and we don't realize that life, the way we believe it, is not as precious to them. Success is the most precious thing. So I think that was pretty surreal for me. Another one, be responsive and respect others' cultures, even and especially if we do not understand it. And I've got a great story about this. Do y'all remember the year that we had our revival? And it was right after a young man had thrown himself off the bridge because his roommate had recorded him and another young man. Okay, so 3 times we had 3 different speakers, and all 3 speakers addressed it because it was so in your face. And one of the ministers said, where was the person who stands between this person and the bridge? Who stops this person from taking their life? Well, we got in Gateway class, and I said, okay, we've just gotten through with great nights of service, convocation. Would anybody like to say anything and respond to it? Because we were doing our faith theme, and one young man said, and it shocked me, he said, yeah, I wish they wouldn't keep loving those fags. This was said in my classroom. And after I picked myself up off the floor, I thought, oh God, give me wisdom, because he needs to be cared for too, just like the people he's hating. And a young lady in the front row turned around, and it was a God thing. And she stepped in and she said, and you could tell she was from a foreign country, and she said, she was there on scholarship. She was playing soccer or volleyball. But she said, my coach, I think it was Andrea Hudson was her coach, so she was playing volleyball. My coach gave us a Bible. I'm not a Christian. She looked at him and she said, but can I ask you, are you a Christian? And she said it very humbly. I could not have paid her to do this any better. It was beautiful. And as he responded to her, yes, I'm a Christian, very haughtily. I saw her humility break it down in such a beautiful way. And of course I met with him after class, but you have to be so careful in biases, and it's hard for us when it is done so hatefully not to get in there. But you know what? They're in our church too, and so I have to pray over that one. I have to say, okay, God, this is a learning experience, and thank you for putting him in our path. And so it was quite a long semester. I met 3 times with his youth pastor, and because they bring in, this is Gateway, they're freshmen, they're bringing in everything they've learned back home, and so there's dissonance with what they learn here, and when they come across a culture that's different, and they have biases, they bring those prejudices, and so we're working with those young people too. And we have to love them, and we have to educate them with love and not with hatefulness. Another thing challenge lovingly cognitive distortions based on fear, which is false evidence appearing real. And these are distortions that they also bring. There are fears that everybody in the South hates this type of person. And there are absolute fears that they bring in with them, and so we challenge those with love, and they are distortions. But you know what? We bring things with us. We hear stories about other cultures, and we don't even research it to see if it's real. And so I think challenging those with education and lovingly. And then the final thing, I think, out of everything else, it kind of loops it all up. Just treat others as you want to be treated.
Mm-hmm. Oh, somebody said that.
Give him a break. and he wasn't white.
You're right.
But give people a break, and even in ignorance, we're responsible for helping them as well, for educating, but we're responsible to do it in love.
Well, Carolyn kept sending us one or two different kind of messages about what we're going to speak on today. So one of them was of your conceptual framework, and so I have written out some thoughts on identity. And so if you bear with me, I'll read them aloud, because this kind of frames my thinking. And also, this frames my thinking. And so this is a picture of a class, and it kind of refers to one of the identities that I want to talk about. Plus, Alan had to listen to me read this last night. So. Okay, so, and I'm coming really from the perspective of human development, or ideas of development. So I'm going to read the first bit, then I'll tell a couple of stories as well. As you know, there are many theories concerning human development and how we form our identity. In my classes on human development and on collaboration, I tend to tell stories, as I believe that it is through narrative and text that all identity is mediated and changed, or it becomes residual and stagnant. My approach is based on the theory of identity of Paul Ricoeur, a French philosopher of the 20th century. I came across his ideas when I first was doing my doctorate, and I was just so thrilled that he was a little different to other post-structuralists and, postmodernists, etc. In his work, Oneself as Another, that's the title of the book, and what a wonderful title. I'll just say it again, One's Self as Another. Ricoeur distinguishes two forms of identity, which he refers to as the two sides of the same coin. These are idem identity, which is the pictures I just showed you, and ipsi identity. As I understand these concepts, idem identity is that which distinguishes me from others, generally a class of others, as Trish McClung. When I walk down the street, someone might ask, who is that? And the response would be, that is Trish McClung, or no, that's not Trish McClung. In a sense, it is a permanent designation of the same self through time. It represents sameness as in who I am, sameness with my class, which is human, and yet difference from others in my class. Whilst it contains the powerful notion of sameness with all other humans and is worth pursuing in connection with any important and sometimes misleading subcategories such as race, it is the ipsi identity that I believe is important in my discussions in class. That is not to say that both sides of the same coin are not intertwined, but they may also be seen as different. Ipsi identity refers to the notion of the actual, not who I am, but what I am. The essential me, I, myself. This essential me is always becoming. Yeah, I'm moved by this. It's probably crazy. I'm a different person to what I was 30 years ago. This essential me can be seen by me as an other, both now and over time. Trish McClung cannot change who she is, but she can change what she is through her many different experiences and interactions. For me as teacher, this is the important piece, and here I quote from the European Information Society Initiative on Identity. Ipsi identity refers to the unique sense of self that a person has about his own being. Ipsi identity concerns a first-person perspective. It may involve the process of rewriting the story of your life that enables you to reinterpret your past experience and is essential for acting as a person with a sense of self in the present and the future. Norbert Elias said, individuals are humans in process. He went on to say, human is a process. So this identity is social in that we need others, everyone here at Lee, to reconstruct our sense of self over and over again. And I believe that's what we're about. So as teachers, how do we do this? And I believe, I've got 3 kind of examples. I believe we do this through honesty and discussion. We have to talk about these things. We have to talk about race. We have to talk about gender. We have to talk about transgender. We have to talk about all the differences that we experience. Even on this past Monday night, I was talking about the importance of congruency between the student being assessed and the assessor, which is associated in my field with the idea of non-discriminatory assessment. I have one African American lady in the class. Sometimes I find it difficult to discuss some aspects openly, and I am often afraid of offending. This Monday I clumsily explained that students respond to sameness and do better when tested by someone with whom they can identify, including at times someone who looks like them. This is a problem in education because we have a preponderance of white females. So what happened was, I said how when I was in the Congo, I was 18 years of age. I was the only white person in sight. I got lost. And so I admitted I looked for somebody who looked like me. And I was trying to explain what congruency was, how we look for sameness. But then I felt uneasy about it because she was the only black person in the room. Then we moved classrooms because it was so hot. So she sat on the front row and everybody else sat on the rows behind her. So it was like one of those sort of slapping in the face type pieces, like, why is this happening? And I feel like I might have offended her anyway. And so one of the other people, and this is a graduate class, said, why are you sitting by yourself? Don't you like us? And so it got kind of worse and worse as it went. And none of it was actually real. It was just me feeling like, oh, what have I done, sort of thing. Anyway, so after class, I felt I should address what I said with her directly. I felt I might have offended her. And I asked her, do you understand what I was talking about in connection with congruency? And then, surprise, surprise, she understood exactly what I was talking about. She related to me that a young student of about 8 years of age had been transferred to her school that is predominantly black and was placed in her self-contained classroom for students with special ed needs. He came from what she called a white school and had been labeled as having all kinds of problems. He is now blossoming and will soon leave this special education classroom. She attributed this to him being in a setting that offered him some congruency and acceptance. So whilst we might debate the merits and demerits of whether white people can teach black students and black professors can teach white students, that's not why I tell this story this afternoon. I tell it because the fact remains, if I had not directly gone and spoken to her, I would never have known that she was on the same page as I was and that she was completely okay with what I said. Completely okay with my example. And then I believe the second way we should help our students is to offer obviously direct experiences if we can. I think that's what we do in Global Perspectives and lots of other things. But then I also offer what I call vicarious experiences. And by that, I mean stories of myself. So I find that in my own classroom, I often tell stories of how I've changed over time. So when I talk about collaboration, and I talk about being in an IEP or individual plan meeting for special ed students, I talk about how we bring our baggage to the table as well. Mm-hmm. And so I talk about how, whilst I'm an American citizen, I'll always have the demon of Englishness within me. But how over time that demon is getting smaller on a lot of levels. And so I tell this story how I was raised to hate Catholics. And that may or may not seem a big deal to you, but coming from a very Protestant background, I was born in a town, this is my cultural background, I was born in a town where there's a road called Lollard's Pit. I don't know if you're familiar with who the Lollards were, but they were pre-reformers. So in my town, they would take these pre-reformers Protestants and burn them at the stake. So as a child, our field trips were to this pit where they burned Protestants. And so growing up, you know, I thought, wow. And I had a reason for this feeling. Catholics are terrible. And then I tell the story in my family. My mother had a cousin who got a scholarship to the Notre Dame Catholic Girls' School. And by the time she was 18, she decided to become a nun. You could not imagine how terrible that was in our family. Always in hallowed terms, her name was mentioned. Cousin Dorothy, she's a nun. And so, you know, she never came home, we didn't know her, and she'd been quite close to my mother growing up. And then we had this kind of wonderful experience. One day, Cousin Dorothy wrote to my mother and said, Marjorie, the convent is opened, and I would like to come and visit you. So I'll always remember the day she knocked on our door, and you know, what was going to appear on the other side, Cousin Dorothy the nun. And she was there, standing in her habit, came in, we had tea, but surprise, surprise, Cousin Dorothy was a Christian. Cousin Dorothy was even filled with the Holy Spirit. And that began a change in my feeling and thinking. I tell this story in class. And I also tell a story which is fairly lengthy. Alan and I had an experience when we had director in Hughes Hall. Dr. Khan allowed an IRA terrorist who'd become a Christian through Alan's brother's ministry to come to Lee. And he came to our dorm. And he was a murderer. He lived in Hughes Hall. He was a Catholic, had been a Catholic. And he came, and Alan went upstairs and spoke to him and said, he recognized Alan, but Alan didn't recognize him to begin with because he turned state's evidence and all this kind of thing. And so he asked Alan, do you know any Irish people? So Alan said, well, I did know one in Amsterdam. And then it kind of came over Alan and he said, actually, I think I'm looking at him. And so the guy replied, yes, you are. And so he was here at Lee for a time, and he had been a Catholic, he'd been a murderer, shot someone directly in the face, yet he babysat our 4-year-old daughter. So I like to tell these vicarious kind of experiences, how over time things change, and over time your attitude towards other people will change. And I think it's very valuable as a professor to let them know that we have changed, and we've changed our attitudes towards things, towards people, towards groups of people. And then the last thing I do, and I won't ask you to do it, I do this called Circle of Friends activity. So this is to do with disabilities generally. So my third point is that through activities we can demonstrate, or even maybe, I hate to use the term slap someone in the face, but it's a wake-up call. And so this afternoon, what I was going to ask you to do in this small circle was to write your nearest and dearest, the people who you love the absolute most. Then in the second circle, I asked people to write those who you like your friends. These are your teammates, they're your ensemble, they're your club members. You know, who's going to go in this circle? Third circle, the people who you may, you'd have a cup of coffee with in the cafeteria. You'd call them friends, but they're not close friends. But you know, they're existing in your life, and you would count them as friends. Then in the fourth circle, I asked people to write, or my students to write, friends who have played 2 roles in your life. And Al and I were talking about this last night. Maybe they're your youth pastor, or they're paid to be your friends to some extent. They're your dorm directors. They're anybody sitting here, but they do play these 2 roles in your life. You know, and I asked them how we go through various different scenarios to do with disabilities. But when we were talking about it last night, I said if I was going to do this today, I was going to ask people to write a C beside the names of people who are radically different to you, but you count them as friends. And we decided we have very few. So I think that's an indictment to some extent. You know, we have some in the third and fourth circle, but none in the close circle. So they're my three ways of kind of trying to demonstrate how identity can change over time, through directly discussing it with somebody, through talking about my own changes, and then also by doing some kind of activity that would show difference. And maybe we need to change that.
Does anybody have any questions or discussion?
I have a point. When Dr. Reba Barkley was on our faculty, we were very good. We were all very good friends with her. And, she went to Thailand twice with me. We were quite close, and we presented together at different places. And we were talking one day, and I said, and I felt like I could talk with her fairly, straight about different things. And I said, you and I have more in common with each other. I know I'm white and you're black, I said, but we have many more things in common than this person over here who is white. But just because of the nature of where they are in their life or where they live or whatever, it's just because they're white and I'm white. What we have in common is so much bigger and more than what I would have in common with that person. We just chatted about it and talked about it at length, and all the different things that we shared, the different things we liked and the things we liked to do, all the things we had in common that interested us. And it was nice to be able to talk with someone like that on that kind of, level of stuff. And we still keep in touch. She's
And two, for those faculty who have lived abroad or who have immigrated here from some other place, I think we have a great deal of empathy with the students who are different in the classroom because of ethnicity or national origin or whatever. And one of the things I do in Global Perspectives, and international students have told me, some of the American ethnic minority students have told me the same thing. They appreciate stories I tell because I'm very open and honest about what a cultural klutz I was when I first went to Egypt. And there are two words for foreigner in Arabic, Egyptian Arabic. One is ajnabi, that's the good word, okay? Khawaga is the other one. And I was frequently called Khawaga, okay? And it's about equivalent to the N word, it really is. And but I remember I diffused a lot of really awkward situations where I would do something, I knew I did something wrong because the room would stop, and I would just go, Ana Khawaga, what do you expect, I'm a Khawaga. But getting a handle on that, getting a handle on how to function in the other culture is a tremendous struggle for students, even if the difference is only ethnic and we're all Americans, I know, because both sides, especially when we're talking like about African Americans and white Americans, both sides have misconceptions about the other, and they're afraid of interacting with each other. And that's a tough thing to come, but I find if we do experiences outside the classroom, like archaeology field schools or study abroad trips, stuff like that, that really helps crack the barrier on a lot of that stuff, just getting people involved with each other in a little bit different context than the classroom, if that's possible.
This is all great. So many things to share. I was born in a different country, have been a minority in every university that I have worked in. Came from a black university before coming to Lee University, has been discriminated against in 2 institutions. And I can definitely resonate with so much of what you guys have said. And the teachers of Edward Hall in cultural studies, almost the father of, of cultural studies. And here I teach a class in intercultural communication, which resembles a little bit of what you're saying in Global Perspectives. But being in a historical black college and university for a few years has been life-changing to me. They talk about high and low culture, and coming from the high culture of Brazil, and of course there's a lot of difference between the high and the low culture of Brazil and that culture alone. But going to Jackson State was interesting, was very interesting. In fact, I was the only known African American person in a building in the east center of Mississippi, where about, with the exception of one student in our classes, everybody else was an African American. And in that environment, in a very short period of time, I came to the conclusion of a number of things when dealing with African American students. But number one, you cannot teach them if they don't trust you, period. Starts with that. Second, whenever we start understanding who they are, where they're coming from, and we start using terminologies that they understand, like who is Medgar Evers, talking about Booker T. Washington, and some of the scholars, Webb Du Bois, that tends to be a little more romanticized in my culture. But we start talking a little bit about the struggles that they face within their communities. Even if you're not an African American, they respect you. And I remember the dean asking, so, well, Luis, we came here to create a school of communication, and we did together. And then the second year of appointment, she appointed me the department chair. So here am I, like a known African American, being a chair of a black university, right? So interim, but interesting that how the dynamics, how I ended up playing that. And when I used to go to the classroom and have a conversation with the kids, they're very bright, very practical, one of the most creative students I've ever taught in my career. And the perception on, and I don't know enough about Lee to comment here, but the institutions that I worked before Jackson State was that the students, the black students, the African American students, were not as good. And I say, I don't think so. I think that what we need to address a little more is to better understand where they're coming from and try to better understand their culture, or subculture, or their ethnicity better than culture, since they're still American. It is amazing what kids can produce. This is one of the very best workshops I've ever attended in my career in higher education, like the love and the passion that you guys are talking about of folks of minority descent. Minority, like the macro stance. It's an important topic to talk about. I just want to say that I appreciate the fact that, ma'am, you put this together and then we are here. Speakers, this is so important. I mean, look, a lot of, we're educators, we have to care for the kids, and I'm getting a little emotional about this, and I hope you guys don't mind about that. Just want to share that.
I didn't mention language, but I think language is such a difficult thing. How we refer to the other. Again, in this graduate class, not this semester, but last semester, I was dealing with socioeconomic factors, so I was dealing with poverty. And after everybody chimed in and said their various different things, I began to realize we're using the pronoun they, them, those. That type of thing is so difficult. So I stood back and said, what do we all sound like? So a lady from the back of the room said, a bunch of snobs. Because she said, I go to the food bank. I go to the health department. I have 3 kids. My husband is unemployed. And so I'm interested in the problem of language, of how we actually speak to and about the other, because it seems so offensive sometimes. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on that. How do we talk about that in general terms?
Can I just say one thing? I think one thing we can all do, this is truly possible, is learn how to pronounce our names correctly.
Yes.
And it's so, that's one of the things kids say, just call me Anna. Nobody can pronounce my name. What is your name? And then she'll say what it is. Well, I think I can learn to say that. Well, oh no, everybody just calls me Anna. But that's the core of their identity. And it's such, we're asking them to learn the English language. it seems like we could learn their name. And not just some whacked out version of it, some old, Cleveland pronunciation of it. We can learn how to pronounce their name. It's humanly possible. We can make those sounds if we want to.
In my global perspective class, the Nigerian students just light up when I pronounce their
Yeah,
name.
when
It's
you say
easy
the
to,
whole
I mean,
name,
they're very phonetically written.
Those are, they're long, but
Yeah.
they're not hard.
But I do, and other students too, that have other names that are strange to us, but if you say it, it makes a difference to them.
It makes so much difference. It makes so much difference. And the Nigerian names are kind of sacred. Those little pieces mean something. So they mean blessed of God, or they mean something that's really essential to their identity as a person. And if you just whack it off because it's too many syllables, it's kind of a bigger mutilation than changing Robert to Bob.
And when I don't get it, I ask them to correct me. And I know it's a little awkward to be the teacher and to ask them, how do you pronounce your name? But I do it.
Especially in a linguistic class, but that's beside the point.
Doesn't happen often, but you run into a few.
To me, it happens the other way around. Sometimes it's so difficult to pronounce the North American names. Like, my first semester, I didn't know how to pronounce the name Blake. I thought for me was Blackie was the proper way. Like he was a Caucasian and he laughed. I said, yes, Dr. Cuellar, I'm Blackie. So I learned my lesson right away. So, oh my goodness, I made those embarrassing mistakes in my class.
But you're going to make the mistakes anyway. I unfortunately had a few years in my life when I had Carolyn's former job as a vice president for academic affairs. And the one part of that job that you hate is at graduation. This was at Manoa Ryan University, and we had an awful lot of Hmong students. If you know anything about the Hmong language, it's a very complicated language, but phonetically organized to some extent. And I was so proud by almost near the end of the line of several hundred students that I did not mess up anybody's name. And then a very stereotypical American English girl came through with a name that was so easy to pronounce I messed it up. And as she walked across the stage, she pronounced it correctly to everybody. One of my more embarrassing moments. That's scary. You know, identity is something that, and I love your distinctions, although I don't remember them, those two words that you use for that, is something that we oftentimes assume is based upon the more visible characteristics. And my experience has been that, students who are Latino, for some, it's extremely important to their identity. For others, it's not. In my multicultural perspectives class, we start out talking primarily about race and ethnicity, but then we kind of branch out to begin looking at gender, and we begin looking at sexual orientation, we begin looking at religion, we look at social class. And what you find out is that for many students, it's not the more visible things that make up the important parts of their identity. It's oftentimes the invisible things. And the way we find out about those is, I have a fairly diverse class, and so I break them down into groups of 6 or 7. Every class has hopefully a relative sample of the diversity in the class itself. And they and I get to know the students as they tell each other stories. All 3 of you actually. I think the power of stories is so important, especially for people like Richard. I come from the macro perspective. Sometimes you have to break away from that, as you suggested, and oftentimes it's in the sharing of our stories, and even the stories when we got things wrong. I'm kind of like you, Richard. I probably had more of those than I had when I got things right, at times, and it makes us appear a little bit more human, but it also gives them a sense of I guess empathy in some ways for us, but that gives us a connection. I think in some ways with them. And you learn about, what's really important to them. Back in the 60s and 70s, when I was teaching, I have a number of African American students who race was the #1 issue for them. Not as much today. Same thing with gender in the 70s. I would often ask students, what are the important components of your identity? I didn't always ask it that way, and gender would be number one. You know, today, it's very rare that you have female students who identify gender as the number one component of their identity. And so it's something oftentimes, I do a lot of listening, or at least I try to. You know, when you have large classes, it's kind of hard to listen to them individually, so you kind of have to listen to them collectively. And you learn about, you know, not only what their important pieces of identity are, but what you were talking about, the identity development itself and how it progresses over time. One of the books that's really that informed me was Beverly Tatum's book, Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria? And I understand she's just come out with a new version of that that's about 100 pages longer. You all read that book, it's very small. But while it deals with that question, it also deals with the point that you were talking about, in that we tend to stay with people who we are familiar with. It's a very, I don't want to say it's a universal cultural trait, but I think there's a certain element of that in all cultures where we just want to be with people who are like us. It's much easier. We don't have to worry about language as much. We don't have to worry about making mistakes and stepping on toes. And I love that that exercise that you have. I want to borrow one of those sheets from you. I might like to try that myself.
I made a copy.
Yeah, okay. And you know, it's oftentimes in the process of understanding our identity, we understand how almost cloistered we are within the people who we know. Even with my diverse students, most of them will tell me that this is the first time in college. Being in college is the first time they've had the opportunity, and you kind of alluded to this, and to meet with people who are so different in many ways, culturally, ethnically, nationally, you know, religion, a number of other aspects as well.
I'd say one thing that about the international students that I've had a lot of interaction with, one thing I try to reassure them about is the dissonance is, there's always going to be some there. It's never going to go totally away. I mean, in anthropology we say we learn enough about the other culture to know we'll never be one of them, but then we go home to our own culture and know it ain't right here anymore either. We're not happy here. That's exactly how, I mean, when I went to Egypt to live there, I was there long enough to know enough of the language, enough about the people. I'll never be an Arab. Okay, I know that. Come back home and this culture looked totally different to me. I'm changed, I'm different. I'm not satisfied with this. I don't look at it the same way anymore. So there's always that dissonance, but that doesn't have to be detrimental.
Right.
That makes you think about things, and that's what I tried to reassure them about, right? That you can make choices that other people can't make because you have both of these experiences, and you can see things differently than other people do, and that's a strength, I think.
And just thinking about Miroslav Volf, who came, and I know there's a lot of questions about this, but I think as Christians, we should understand that piece, because we are travelers. We are in a society, we're different within a society. And I know we should be in the marketplace. I mean, there are other questions that you addressed, Erin, in your response to him were really important. But we are traveling through, and we should understand that stranger feeling and be able to empathize with that, I believe.
I don't know what you're remembering from my response. That's the part I liked.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
Okay.
not the part you didn't.
I've always known for the critical. I don't understand.
No. I
But
didn't read
there
that.
are
Yeah.
very interesting books on what Christians have to learn from immigrants and
Yeah,
things like that. We
yeah.
are supposed to be immigrants.
We are,
I mean,
yeah.
this is, if you want to talk about identity, I mean, we have much to learn from the people who actually know what it is Christians we're supposed to be before we made ourselves comfortable and started defending our
Yeah.
property and our rights and our things like this.
No, I didn't mean to
Yeah.
insinuate you were against that.
No, I'm trying-
You
yeah.
spoke to it.
One thought that occurs to me based on this is just how when we moved back from Russia to the States and came here to Lee, I felt a lot of acceptance from this community and everything, but I realized in the first couple of years that I was really feeling the loss of others knowing me, and knowing what I had done and gone through, and kind of having a sense of my history, which is also part of my identity.
Yeah.
And I'm just the new guy, and they're happy I'm here, but they don't know anything about who I am and what I've done, you know, kind of thing. And so many times immigrants, our experiences, even our students who haven't had a lot of life experience yet, have accomplished things and are somebody, and you know, maybe they're the bright star from their family, you know, that everybody's so proud of or something. And they come here and they're really a faceless nobody, and sometimes even less than that, you know. I mean, like people treat them like, you know, just learn English already, or I mean, that kind of an attitude. And that is a really big thing, you know, to deal with. And I remember somebody came and visited us from our Moscow days, and after we got done with it, both my wife and I were just feeling, oh my goodness, that was so refreshing to have somebody who has history with us, you know, and who knows who we are, and you know, that kind of thing. And I think, you know, I mean, I don't know, that doesn't give us any real guidance here, but I think, again, just listening to people, as you were saying, and really getting to know people a little bit, we can get a sense for who they are, you know, what their life experiences have been, which have shaped who they are, instead of just seeing them as, you know, just another student.
To your point, when I was in Italy in 2016, I don't speak Italian, but I was leading a group of students to do Renaissance art and that sort of thing. But when we were in Assisi, I encountered a man walking down the street who was wearing a Tennessee Volunteers hat. And if you encounter a fellow Tennessean when you're in Italy, he's your best friend. You know, American is your neighbor, a Tennessean is your best friend. And what it is it's just like encountering an oasis in the desert of someone who understands you. And travel, I've never got the opportunity to live abroad, but even as a little taste of travel I've had given me that. The international students that we deal with, they're not uncommon. There's lots of them. I want so desperately to be that oasis for them, and I don't know how to do it. I'm clumsy in doing it, but I feel that there's a responsibility, there's a Christian mandate that I be this for them. So the reason I'm here and the reason I'm so grateful that we do this is because I find ways to do that better. It's a responsibility. So I'm grateful for this, and that's my drive, is to be that for somebody, to understand their history, not make them feel like they're exasperating someone, trying to understand, or dealing with the language barrier or the cultural barrier in a way that interferes with me, but feel so relaxed with them and so giving and so compassionate that they just feel a little bit at home, just a taste of that. If I can do that, that's everything.
And I think that starts with hearing their stories, taking the time to listen to them and hear their stories.
I was just going to say, beyond the names, I mean, there was one student I had in the core class. She doesn't care about classics. She's a science person. 4 years later, she is still coming to my office because I pronounced her name correctly. Like, I mean, literally today, before I came here, from Nigeria. And I said, oh, your name is not, it's not difficult. You know, I didn't think it was, most of them are. For some reason, I got this one right. It's just really striking what that does. But I've also had students to my house where I say, okay, we're getting out the World Atlas, show me where you're from. It's actually embarrassing. There are students from cities of millions of people, and you've never heard the name of the city, but it's in Brazil or something like this. And you're like, okay, I have a PhD, I've traveled a lot, I have no idea what, I have everything to learn, and nothing really to share. I mean, but it's they love it. I mean, they love it when you pull out the World Atlas and say, oh, where are you from? Tell me about it.
My granddaughter would say, Google it.
We have a Wi-Fi free zone at my house. So we pull out a hard copy of it.
My 4-year-old grandson asked my wife yesterday, do you have Wi-Fi when you came in the door?
Oh, gosh.
Of course we do, but you know, so he was happy because he had his tablet with him.
Well, our time is up. I think this has been a really helpful conversation, maybe just the beginning of a conversation. And when we have coffee or lunch, or we can continue to talk about it. I think it's really important, and I think the atmosphere right now for our kids is really tense for international students and immigrant students, and certainly for DACA students. So you can just remember how frightened they are. I think that's helpful. So thank you very much. Thanks, guys.